Welcome to Medically Speaking. Our guest today is Dr. Sal Pietrantoni, a pulmonologist with General Physicians PC. Doc, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
So the topic of the Canadian wildfires, obviously much talked about here in Western New York. We figured we'd come to you, a pulmonologist, to talk about what the facts are here in terms of what the real dangers are, how long people can be outside and all that. But first, let's start with a little bit about your background. You're a pulmonologist. For those who may not know, what's a pulmonologist do when it comes to the medical world?
Mostly regarding anything with lungs. So sometimes I introduce myself as a lung doctor. So typically asthma, anything chronic lung disease wise. So COPD or emphysema, lung cancer. Asthma is probably going to be an important part of what we're speaking about today. But those are typical, areas that we'll see patients from a pulmonary doctor's standpoint.
Great. I think that's helpful to get people grounded in terms of your background and why you're the subject matter expert to talk about this. If you can, start with overall your thoughts on the wildfires and the overall danger it may present to Western New York.
Sure. We've seen reports about the air quality and how it affects certain parts of our community. And for the purposes of pulmonologists, this has affected anyone with chronic lung diseases, and there's certain risks upon other parts of the population. And the one of the items that I've seen reported over and over is the air quality index. So I think that's been very helpful to help give us a more objective measure as to how much to worry. So the air quality index has been helpful on a day-to-day basis.
So you mentioned the word risk earlier. I think that's what the average healthcare consumer might be asking: is everybody at risk when those warnings go off in terms of the air quality, or is it really people who are already compromised?
So anybody could be at risk, but I found the air quality index to be the most helpful. So generally when anyone with a chronic lung disease or even underlying cardiovascular disease, we know that poor air quality tends to aggravate those situations. So whether you have asthma, emphysema, COPD, or even a heart condition, generally poor air quality worsens that risk. And generally that risk applies basically if you feel that if those are the situations that somebody may be in, then that air quality index over 100 generally is pitching some risk upon, I guess the higher the number, and there's a number of 0 to 500. So generally the number much greater than 100 poses a risk to any segment of the population, but moreover, especially the persons with chronic lung disease or even heart disease. And generally those risks climb a whole lot when we are over levels of 200. But certainly even the 0 to 100 is generally acceptable, but 1 to 200 is where we start worrying about risk.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, because this does come up from time to time. What about people who are healthy and their exposure to that? And then also whether they're healthy or not, the exposure for pets, because that's obviously a huge concern. I know I'm not a veterinarian, but I'm sure your patients ask you that as well.
Yes, they do. So I think the same risk supply, and I've had those questions, as well pitched. Generally, again, it's hard to tell when you look out the window and look at the sky. Is there too much smoke or just enough smoke that you could get by? It's hard to tell. And so I tend to use that air quality index as well for my own measure. For people with normal lungs, there is some risk. As long as that number is over 100, you're generally at some level of risk of having, let's say, just watery eyes, cough, stuffy nose. There's still risk over AQI of over 100. So generally that risk just keeps climbing, with any kind of lung disease. So for pets, you're right. I wouldn't have much experience that way, but it does come up, and I would treat the pet the same as a human being, I suppose.
Sure. So again, whether you're healthy or not, there could be some long-lasting effects if people are exposed either too long or at too higher levels. So what's your advice to people who may have to work outside, still want to exercise outside, or have to commute or be outside for certain reasons? What's your advice to them in terms of protection?
All right. So obviously, if you can avoid being out in when the air quality is poor, obviously that's an easy one. But a lot of people have to work in these situations. So, basically, if they could wear a respirator or avoid their exposure in those extremes. Heat itself is an aggravating factor. So people that work generally in the sun, superimposed upon poor air quality, are probably going to be much worse off. So obviously, we're asking persons to limit their time outdoors. A respirator in the sense of the commonplace paper masks that we've unfortunately had to get used to for a while. So they seem to be in, reasonable supply. And I think that's an appropriate way to mitigate some risk if you're, have to be working outside. As far as exercise goes, generally you would, people that are exercising are probably somewhat fit to begin with. So generally, we know that the risk increases when that AQI comes over 100. So generally less than 100, I think it's okay. When that number increases as such, I think it's important even for someone that's healthy that just enjoys exercise outdoors. As myself, I tend to stay in when that number climbs well over 100.
Your doctor's telling you that, obviously it's good advice for the patient as well. So you mentioned earlier, we can wrap up with this question. You mentioned earlier you've been almost forced to kind of pay attention to what's going on with those wildfires, and you're up in Quebec. How long do you foresee this going on? We've heard rumors of could be until the winter, until the snow falls. Any of your colleagues up there, have you been in contact with them? Any sense of how long this may go on?
So I've looked into it as far as Canadian ministries of health and even our own health departments, and the answers seem to be sort of smattered all over, meaning that situationally there seems to be a kind of a lull or where the jet stream is weakened, and so this air mass is sitting over us for a long time and has been. When that will really move on, it's really anyone's guess. I've heard the same, as though when precipitation occurs, rain, snow, maybe these things will become extinguished. But no, I really don't have a timeline. And hopefully this is once in a very long interval of this natural process even. I mean, to the extent, we expect forest fires, but I think with the excess heat we've had, especially this summer, this definitely increased the severity over previous episodes of wildfires in Eastern Canada. So I don't have a good sense of how long it will last. It's hard to tell. Just when you think we're out of it, it seems to come back all over again, right?
Sure. So, but between now and then, your advice is just follow the experts' counsel and advice whether it's a meteorologist or physicians.
I think the meteorologists are doing a good job. Yeah, I mean, even when I checked my own app just to check what the weather's going to be like, I noticed I probably never noticed it before, but the AQI is on there, and it gives you a pretty good reference of safety of exercising or working outside. So yeah, that would be my advice. I think just following weather and meteorologist reports and suggestions. I think they've been pretty good with that.
That's great advice from general physicians pulmonologist Dr. Sal Pietrantoni. Doc, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.